She's with me. She works in hospital admin somewhere. Just wave her through. My mother said it without turning her head, her attention already fixed on the gilded lobby beyond the security desk, scanning for faces worth finding. The guard looked at the lanyard I had just extended toward him. His flashlight moved across the laminate badge, past my photo, past the Toronto General Hospital crest. It stopped on the title printed in clean block letters beneath my name. Chief of Cardiac Surgery, Guest of Honor. He lowered the flashlight, his face went very still. Into his radio, carefully, like someone reading a detonator wire. Front desk, I need someone from the Gala committee at the main entrance. I have the Guest of Honor here, right now. My mother laughed, a short, dismissive sound. Stand down, there's been a mix-up with the lanyard. She answers phones. She put a hand on my arm, not warmly, a corrective grip. Tell him, Audrey. I did not tell him anything. I had been waiting 30 years for exactly this moment. I was not going to help it arrive any faster than it already was. But before I tell you what happened next, and I promise, what happened next will stay with you, I need to take you back to the beginning, because none of it makes sense without 30 years of context. Hit like if you stay, because this story belongs to every person who was ever the wrong child in their own home. I was 8 years old the first time I understood what invisible meant. My father was a carpenter, 32 years of it. His hands were wide and calloused and permanently stained with wood filler and linseed oil, and he believed, with the quiet certainty of a man who had never questioned himself, that nothing on this earth had value unless you could hold it, touch it, prove it existed. His philosophy was 4 words, repeated so often they became the wallpaper of our house in Oakville. Measure twice, cut once. It applied to lumber, it applied to people, it applied to everything he decided mattered. That October, it was a Canadian Thanksgiving weekend. The table still smelled of turkey and cranberry sauce. I spread my provincial science fair project across the kitchen floor. I had built a working water filtration model out of sand, gravel, and activated charcoal I'd ordered by mail with my birthday money. I'd spent 6 weeks reading library books about civil engineering and water tables. I was 8 years old. My father stood in the kitchen doorway, hands around a mug of tea, and looked at it for approximately 4 seconds. "That's nice," he said. He went back to watching the Leafs game. 20 minutes later, my brother came through the back door in full hockey gear, soaking wet from practice, his equipment bag dragging along the kitchen floor and leaving a dark streak on the linoleum. He was 10. He had scored a hat trick at the afternoon game. My mother had been there. She had filmed it on the camcorder. She had called her sister from the arena parking lot to describe each goal in detail. That evening, my father moved my filtration model off the kitchen table and stacked it in the corner near the recycling bins without asking. He helped my brother paste his 3 game-worn stickers onto the bedroom mirror. My mother ordered pizza to celebrate. She sang my brother's name when she carried the box in from the car. I ate 2 slices in my room and read about groundwater systems until I fell asleep with the book on my chest. That was the first time, it was not the last. The pattern calcified slowly, the way damage does. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't cruel on purpose, it was just consistent. My brother was bright and loud and magnetic in the way that certain people are, the way that fills a room without effort. He played 3 sports. He told stories that made my father slap the table. He had a smile that strangers stopped to comment on. My mother built her identity around him the way you build a house around a load-bearing wall. Everything else existed to support that one structure. I was not that. I was quiet. I read. I won things on paper and brought them home in envelopes and put them on the counter and watched them sit there untouched until I eventually threw them away myself. When I was 16, my father had his first cardiac event, not severe. A warning, the cardiologist said. Change of diet, stress management, follow-up in 6 months. My father came home from the hospital, rattled in a way I had never seen before, and sat at the kitchen table for a long time without speaking. I sat across from him and looked up the name of his cardiologist and wrote down the follow-up date and the medication name and the dietary restrictions. I made him a list. I left it by the coffee maker, where he would see it first thing. He said nothing about the list. He didn't throw it away, though. I noticed that later. My brother, who was 18 and already the family celebrity, came home that evening with his girlfriend and a case of Canadian and didn't ask once how the appointment went. My mother cooked my brother's favorite dinner that night because he'd had a hard week. She didn't ask how I was feeling either. I was 16 and I had just spent 3 hours researching my father's heart condition in the school library, and nobody in my house knew or cared. I learned that night how to file things away. Heart in one compartment, face in another, carry on. The acceptance letter from the University of Toronto Faculty of Medicine arrived on a Thursday in February. I was 22. I'd been working 2 jobs since undergrad to cover rent and keep my grades where they needed to be. I brought the letter home to show my parents, not because I needed their approval, but because some part of me still, after all those years, wanted to see their faces. My mother read the first line. She set the letter down. She said, "Audrey, that's 8 more years of school, and then what? You'll be 30 before you have anything to show for it. Your brother is already building something real." My brother was selling mobile phone accessories from a kiosk at Square One. He had recently described this to my parents as getting into retail tech entrepreneurship. I picked up the letter, I folded it in thirds, I put it in my jacket pocket and zipped it shut. I said, "I'm going to accept." She said, "Don't come crying to me when you're exhausted and alone." I didn't cry, but I did drive to the Tim Hortons on the lakeshore and sit in the parking lot for 45 minutes, drinking bad coffee and staring at the yellow envelope with the U of T crest, and I made a decision. I would not shrink, I would compress. I would take up exactly the space my family left for me, which was none, and I would build everything I needed in the space between their radar. I would become so good at what I did that eventually the world would have no choice but to make room for me. I pulled out of that parking lot and I did not look back. Medical school, residency in general surgery, fellowship in cardiac surgery at St. Michael's. 12-hour shifts, 24-hour shifts, weekends that weren't weekends, holidays that weren't holidays. I have eaten Christmas dinner in a hospital cafeteria. I have called my mother from a call room at 3 a.m. to wish her a happy new year. She asked if I'd seen my brother's new truck. I had not seen my brother's new truck. I had just finished a 6-hour bypass surgery on a 54-year-old school teacher from Barrie, who was going to live because of what my hands had done in the past 6 hours. I said, "That's great, Mum. I have to sleep." And I hung up. The money started small. My brother's kiosk venture folded within a year. He needed $3,000 to cover his supplier debt or face a lien. I was a second-year resident. I had no money. I sent him $3,000 from my line of credit and told myself it was once. It was not once. A year later, a restaurant in Mississauga, a Canadian gastropub concept, he called it. He had a partner and a lease and a logo and absolutely no food industry experience. He needed $12,000 for the build-out shortfall, my mother called. She said the bank had turned him down and the lease would terminate and he would lose everything. I wired $12,000 from my savings account. I want to be honest with you about why I kept doing it, because I know what you're thinking. I've thought the same thing myself 1,000 times in the bathroom mirror. The truth I had to excavate from under 30 years of sediment is this. I didn't give them money because I was naive. I gave them money because somewhere in the circuitry of a child who grew up invisible, I had wired generosity and love so tightly together that I couldn't tell them apart. I had learned, at 8, at 16, at 22, that I was not enough as I was, so I became useful. And useful felt close enough to loved that I stopped examining the distance between them. The restaurant failed 18 months later. My brother owed his suppliers $46,000. I covered 38 of it. His wife, my sister-in-law, a woman who had never once in 8 years asked what I actually did for work, texted me a photo of the kitchen renovation she was planning once the debt was cleared. She used my brother's name in the text. She thanked him. The money had already been laundered through the fiction that it was his. By the time I was made chief of cardiac surgery at Toronto General, one of 5 women to hold that title at a major Ontario teaching hospital in the institution's history, I had quietly transferred approximately $160,000 into my family's various accounts and crisis funds. Money earned in operating rooms, money earned during overnight calls, money earned during the years I skipped vacations and drove a 2009 Civic and bought groceries based on what was on sale. Nobody thanked me. Nobody asked how I was. The money appeared the way oxygen appears in a room, without ceremony, without acknowledgement, simply as the condition of their survival. I told myself it was what family did. Then came the Thanksgiving dinner that changed everything. It was October. My brother arrived in a new SUV, dark gray, leather interior, heated seats, that he had described to my mother over the phone as an investment in professional image. My mother had relayed this to me with the same reverence she once used to describe his hat tricks. Over turkey and stuffing, and the particular kind of forced warmth that only exists in rooms where people are pretending, my brother held court. He had pivoted. He was no longer in restaurants. He was in healthcare consulting. He had connections. He was advising hospital systems on operational efficiency. He name-dropped the president of the Ontario Hospital Association. He mentioned a lunch with a chief of medicine at Sunnybrook. I set down my fork. The chief of medicine at Sunnybrook, whose name he said, casually, the way you mentioned someone who borrows your lawnmower on weekends, was a woman I had trained with during fellowship. We had coffee every 6 weeks. She had sent me a handwritten card when I made chief. She called me by my first name. I picked my fork back up, I cut a piece of turkey, I chewed it slowly and said nothing. My mother reached across the gravy boat and patted my brother's arm the way she used to kiss his trophies. Then she turned toward me with the expression I had memorized by the time I was 10, the one that said, "You are here, but you are scenery." Isn't that something, Audrey? Your brother is advising hospitals now. Maybe he can put in a good word for you. Get you out whatever department you're filing things in these days. Everyone at the table laughed. My brother's wife, my two cousins, my mother's friend who had come for dessert. They were laughing at the person who had performed open heart surgery on more than 400 patients. I raised my water glass, I drank, I set it down, I said, "He has very impressive connections." I logged every lie my brother told at that table. I noted every name he dropped incorrectly. I filed it behind the same sealed door where I put everything else. The detonator had been armed for years. That dinner was the moment I decided to let it run. The invitation arrived at my mother's address because my emergency contact information hadn't been updated in a decade. I had meant to change it. I hadn't. It was a heavy cream envelope with the Canadian Medical Association crest embossed on the front. Inside, an engraved card on cardstock thick enough to bend a fingernail. The Ontario Cardiac Care Excellence Awards. Keynote speaker and guest of honor, Dr. Audrey Holloway, Chief of Cardiac Surgery, Toronto General Hospital, black tie, the Fairmont Royal York. I found it in my mother's recycling bin, under a furniture sale flyer and 3 weeks of unread mail. She came into the kitchen while I was still holding it. She looked at the envelope, looked at me and said, "I threw that out already. It's junk mail." They put fake medical titles on envelopes to trick gullible people into opening them. She took it from my hand and dropped it back toward the bin. It missed. It landed face up on the kitchen floor. Guest of honor. My mother stepped over it on her way to the coffee maker. I stood in that kitchen for a long time after she left the room. I looked at that envelope on the floor. I thought about the 8-year-old girl with the water filtration model. I thought about the Tim Hortons parking lot on the lakeshore. I thought about $160,000 moving through my bank account like blood through a severed artery, quietly, efficiently, in one direction only. I picked up the envelope, I smoothed the bent corner. 3 days later, my mother mentioned, as if discussing the weather, that she had managed to score 2 tickets to that medical awards thing at the Fairmont. She'd spent weeks cultivating an acquaintance on the organizing committee. She wanted to bring my brother so he could network with hospital executives. It would be good for his consulting business. She handed me a list of instructions for the evening. Wear something plain, dark. Not too dramatic. This isn't your event, it's his opportunity. Walk a few steps behind. Don't insert yourself into conversations. If someone speaks to you directly, keep it brief. I don't want you drawing attention away from your brother while he's trying to make connections. I stood in her kitchen and I listened to every word. I said, "Of course." I dressed that evening in a simple black dress. I wore no hospital badge visibly. I tucked my lanyard, the one with the gold embossed guest of honor seal, beneath the fold of my coat lining, out of sight. I sat in the back seat of my mother's car and watched the city scroll past the windows, and I went somewhere internal and quiet. The place I go before a procedure. The place where hands stop shaking and the rest of the world compresses down to the width of a surgical field. My brother sat in the passenger seat and talked about his contacts at the Toronto Western. My mother nodded with the absolute faith of a woman who had never verified a single claim her son had made. We pulled up to the Fairmont, a red-carpeted entrance, uniformed staff at the doors, warm October light spilling out onto Front Street. My mother stepped up to the security desk with the particular energy of a woman who expected doors to open for her, which, in fairness, they usually did when I was paying for them. "We're on the list," she said. "My son is a healthcare consultant. He has a number of contacts here this evening." The guard found my mother's name. He found my brother's. Then he looked at me, routine procedure, check every occupant of the vehicle. His eyes moved to the lanyard I had quietly produced from beneath my coat. He did not look at it long. Into his radio, very carefully, "I need someone from the event committee at the main entrance, guest of honor on site." My mother laughed. "Stand down, there's been some confusion. She's with me. She works in hospital admin somewhere. Just wave her through." "Ma'am," the guard said, with the stillness of someone trying to get this exactly right, "she's on the guest of honor list. We have an escort standing by." A woman in a navy blazer appeared from the lobby. I recognized her immediately. Dr. Yoon. We had been in residency together at St. Michael's. She had once brought me a granola bar in a supply closet because it was the only meal I was going to get in a 14-hour shift. She had watched me reattach a left anterior descending artery in conditions that most cardiac surgeons would have declined to attempt. She saw me. She stopped. She took one breath. She crossed the lobby, stood directly in front of me, and said, clearly, for everyone at that desk to hear, Dr. Holloway, we have been waiting for you all evening. The committee chair would like a moment before you take the stage. Please, come with me. The air at that entrance went solid. I watched my mother's face move from confusion to something I had never seen there before. The particular expression of someone whose entire architecture has just been weight-tested and found to be made of something that was never load-bearing. Her hand, which had been resting on my brother's arm, fell to her side. My brother made a sound I cannot describe, something between a cough and a silence. I turned to look at them both, just for a moment, nothing on my face. I said, enjoy your evening. I turned and walked through the entrance, and I did not look back. Inside, the ballroom was full of people who knew exactly who I was. I gave a keynote address to 400 physicians, researchers, and administrators. I spoke about outcomes, about the gap in cardiac care access in Northern Ontario communities, about what it costs a health system when high-risk patients don't receive timely intervention, and what it costs them even more when the surgeons who serve those patients are ground down by systems that were never built to sustain them. I spoke about the people who do the invisible work, the work that happens in the dark without applause. And I let my gaze rest, just once, on the back corner of the room where my mother and brother had been seated at the last available table, their name cards handwritten in last-minute cursive, because they'd barely made the guest list on a committee member's grace alone. My mother was staring at the projection screen behind me, where my official hospital portrait and title were displayed 4 meters tall above the stage. Her face was doing something I had never seen it do. It was doing the work of revising every assumption she had ever built about the person she had spent 30 years watching file imaginary papers in an imaginary basement office. My brother was not moving. He was surrounded by actual healthcare executives who had never heard his name and were not going to learn it tonight. I did not aim a speech at them. I didn't need to. I said what I said to the room, and the room understood it, and that was sufficient. Afterward, Dr. Yoon found me in a corridor near the coat check. She stood with her arms folded, and she looked at me for a long moment before she said, I watched you let your mother introduce you as an admin clerk to the security staff of an event where you are the guest of honor. I said yes. Audrey. Her voice was steady, but there was something underneath it, a grief I recognized because I felt it too. I have watched you chair a department during a staffing crisis without taking a single day off. I have never once seen you flinch at anything clinical. What is happening inside your family is not strength. It is something else, and you know that. I stood in that corridor, and I let the words land the way a diagnosis lands. Not a surprise, exactly, but a confirmation of something you had been refusing to name. She was right. I had spent 30 years believing that endurance was a form of love, that if I could absorb enough, fund enough, forgive enough, eventually the ledger would balance. What I understood finally, standing in that corridor in a black dress while 400 people ate dessert on the other side of the wall, was that the ledger had never been mine to balance. I had been pouring myself into an account that was never in my name. I called a cab home, I sat in the back with my coat on my lap and the city moving past, and I opened my banking app. The transfers were all there, automatic, monthly, my brother's business account, my mother's condo maintenance fund, a standing transfer to cover insurance on a vehicle I had never been inside. I canceled them, one by one, 15 separate transactions. The cancellation tones were flat and final, like a call resolved. I opened my email, my mother's address, my brother's, no greeting. Effective tonight, all financial support ends. This is not a negotiation. I am attaching my CV so you can stop guessing what I do. 3 pages. Chief of Cardiac Surgery, Toronto General Hospital. Fellow of the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons of Canada. Canadian Cardiovascular Society Research Award. 431 successful cardiac surgeries. I sent it. I placed my phone face down on the seat. My brother's consulting business collapsed within the week. The healthcare executives he'd been name-dropping as personal contacts did not know him. The chief of medicine at Sunnybrook emailed me personally, characteristically gracious, she always was, to mention she had received an inquiry about him from a potential client and had confirmed she had no professional relationship with him. She said she hoped I was well. My mother's credit card was declined at a restaurant in Oakville in front of 3 women from her book club. My sister-in-law called twice in one day. Her voicemails were long and collapsed at the edges, the way expensive things collapse when the foundation beneath them turns out to be borrowed. She said my brother hadn't eaten. She didn't understand what had happened. She needed me to explain to his clients that it was a misunderstanding. I called her back. I said, there's nothing to explain, they verified the facts. Facts don't require my assistance. She said my name, I said take care of yourself, and I ended the call. 2 weeks later, my mother showed up at my office. She walked past my administrative assistant, past 2 security checkpoints. She sat down in the chair across from my desk before I had a chance to stand. She looked smaller than I remembered. Her hands were in her lap. Mascara had dried in tracks down both cheeks that she had not wiped away. She did not apologize. I want to be honest about that because this is not that kind of story. What she did was open her mouth and say, I didn't know. I genuinely did not know. I thought. She stopped, started again. I thought you were fine. I thought you didn't need me. I looked at her for a long time. I thought about the water filtration model and the Tim Hortons parking lot and $160,000. I thought about the word need coming from someone who had spent 30 years not asking what I needed. I opened my desk drawer and took out a document, a reprint of the Canadian Cardiovascular Society Award citation from the previous year. I had not told my family when I received it. There had seemed no point. I set it on the desk in front of her. She picked it up with both hands. She read it with the slow, careful attention of someone reading something they cannot quite believe. For exceptional contributions to surgical outcomes in high-risk cardiac patients. The page shook. She set it down. I said, you were wrong about what I do, but I need you to understand something. The $160,000 you and your son spent over 15 years, I didn't give it out of love. I gave it because I was trying to buy something that was never for sale. That's as much on me as it is on you. But I'm done paying for something I was never going to receive. She started to cry, not the theatrical kind, the kind with no audience because it doesn't know how to perform, the kind that sounds like air leaving a room. I handed her the box of tissues from the corner of my desk. I waited. 3 months passed, then she called. She asked if she could show me something. She had found it while clearing out the basement storage unit, the one my father had kept locked since he died. She hadn't known where the key was. She'd found it in an envelope taped behind the utility panel, the way you hide something you don't want disturbed. I drove to Oakville on a Sunday afternoon in late January. The unit was small and smelled of cedar and machine oil. She had dragged a wooden crate out into the middle of the concrete floor, my father's crate. The one he had built himself, fitted with a small brass latch, the one he used to keep his good tools in, his chisels and marking gauges and precision levels, the ones he didn't want getting knocked around on a work site. He had not kept tools in it. Inside, folded in a square of canvas that smelled faintly of linseed oil, he had preserved the following things. A newspaper clipping from the Oakville Beaver. April 1997, local student wins regional science competition with water filtration model. My name, my 8-year-old face in grainy newsprint, squinting at the camera, holding up a transparent cylinder of clean water. He had cut it out carefully along the edges, no torn margin. Beneath that, my University of Toronto Convocation Program, Faculty of Medicine. My name in the faculty listing, a small pencil mark in the margin next to it, that was all, a single line, as if he had needed to confirm it was real and had pressed his pencil to the page to make sure. And beneath that, a square of pine, rough cut on one side, sanded smooth on the other. He had carved something into the smooth face with a narrow chisel, the kind of work you do slowly, the kind you do when you want something to last. Measure twice, cut once, she always did. My father, who had shrugged at my science fair project, and never once in his life said the word proud in a direction I could hear, had been measuring me for 30 years with the most private instrument he owned. He had kept the record of it in the dark, in a locked box, told no one, shown no one, because tenderness was a language he had never learned to speak out loud. He had never said it, but he had never stopped knowing it. I held that piece of pine in both hands for a long time. The carving was uneven in places. He had not been a young man when he made it. The chisel had slipped slightly on the last letter. My mother sat on an overturned crate beside me and said nothing. I think she understood, finally, that there was nothing adequate to say. That summer, at the family dinner that had always been my brother's stage, he hung something on the wall. He took down the framed photo of himself accepting a regional business award from a chamber of commerce that no longer existed, and he put up my Royal College Fellowship certificate. He used a level. He drove 2 nails straight. He stepped back, looked at it for a moment, and then set the hammer down on the table and sat with his hands folded and did not deliver a single unsolicited speech about his professional plans. It was the quietest I had ever heard him. My mother stood before the meal and said, in a voice that carried further than she probably intended, "This is my daughter. She is the chief of cardiac surgery at Toronto General Hospital. She has saved lives none of us can count. For 30 years I let her be invisible in this family, and I was wrong, and I am asking her tonight to let us see her, if she'll let us." One sentence, 30 years. It didn't fix anything. I want to be clear about that. An acknowledgement is not a renovation. You cannot fill 30 years of absences with a dinner table speech. But something settled in my chest that evening, not resolved, not repaired, but named. For the first time, someone in that room had said out loud what I had always known to be true, and there is something in being named that nothing else can replicate. I drove home after dinner on the QEW with the city lights coming up ahead of me over the lake, the radio off, and the windows down slightly. Late September. The air still warm enough to feel like summer refusing to leave. I have performed surgery on hearts that had stopped. I have restarted them. I have held a person's most vital organ in my hands, and I have asked it to begin again. In those moments, what keeps you steady is not anger. It is not the accumulated weight of every injustice you absorbed without flinching. It is something much simpler and much harder to name. It is the knowledge that what you are doing is exactly what you were made to do. The people who never saw that were never actually looking at you. They were looking at the reflection of their own expectations and finding it disappointing. That has nothing to do with what you are. Pride is not what you accumulate. It is not the certificates or the titles or the keynote address at the Fairmont Royal York or the Pine Square with the uneven carving from a dead man's locked box. Pride is what happens the moment you stop protecting other people's stories about who you are and start living inside your own truth. 30 years is a long time to live in someone else's story. I have time to make up for it.